Opium has been used for centuries, both as a medicine and as an addictive recreational substance. This dual-natured drug became so important throughout history that it eventually sparked a war between empires. Welcome to Encyclopedia Historia. In this video, we'll talk about the Opium Wars, which were initiated by Britain to dominate the Far East through the opium trade and the aftermath of these conflicts. The British East India Company, which was stronger than many countries and had its own army, began establishing growing trade relations with China in the 17th century. Over time, these ties strengthened as the East India Company took control of and monopolized trade between China and Europe. These growing relations and trade were beneficial to both parties, particularly to China, which held full control over trade within its hinterland. The Chinese government allowed the British to trade only with certain approved merchants and producers. Though the British were not pleased with these restrictions, they continued trading due to the high demand for Chinese goods, such as tea, porcelain, and silk. However, trade became increasingly difficult for Britain because the Chinese only accepted silver in exchange for their goods. This led to a constant depletion of British treasury reserves. In their search for a solution to maintain their silver reserves and continue purchasing Chinese goods, the British turned to opium. Opium was not new to China at that time. It had been introduced earlier by Arab traders and was primarily used as medicine. However, after the British seized control of Java, the opium trade quickly fell into British hands. By 1781, the British began slowly increasing the export of opium to China. For the British, this trade became an important way to address their silver shortage. This plan proved profitable for the East India Company, Great Britain, and even China to an extent. The British gained a bartering product other than silver to use in trade, and the Chinese sold more goods, increasing their revenues. However, the addictive nature of opium soon became a major problem, destabilizing Chinese society. Due to opium's highly addictive effects, Chinese society rapidly grew into a large population of drug addicts, leading to significant social instability. By 1799, China banned opium use and put an end to the trade. However, British merchants, seeing the widespread addiction and the high profitability of the trade, disregarded the ban. They continued smuggling opium into China and selling it. The opium trade expanded further as more European and American traders joined in. In an effort to stop this illegal trade, the Qing government began severely restricting both the opium trade and Britain's trade monopoly. This led to anger among British merchants and a new wave of tensions between Britain and China. When tensions escalated, Chinese officials began destroying British stored opium within Chinese territory. This event was the final straw for the British, who then declared war on China. Britain decided to punish the Chinese dynasty for attacking British trade. Meanwhile, the Chinese did not believe that the British would go to war solely over the destroyed opium, leaving them unprepared. In the early summer of 1840, a British force prepared for war returned to China, demanding compensation for the confiscated and destroyed opium, as well as reparations for the damage caused to British trade. When the Chinese dynasty refused these demands, the British Navy and infantry attacked and captured the Dinghai region of Zhoushan Island. As the war continued, the British won the Battle of Chunpi in January 1841. Concerned about their military capabilities, the Chinese attempted to negotiate peace. The Treaty of Chuanpo was prepared to end the war, but both governments refused to sign the document, and the war continued. In February 1841, after the British won the Battle of the Bogue and the Battle of the First Bar, they captured more territories and continued their assaults for months. In March, Chinese forces sank a British ship that had sailed under a white flag for peace negotiations. This enraged the British, who destroyed the fortress responsible for the attack and then captured the city of Canton. The Chinese attempted to retake the city by May, but were unsuccessful. By the end of May, a treaty was signed between local Chinese officials and the British withdrew to the Bogue fortress. In the following months, though the Chinese were unable to reclaim the lost territories, they showed stronger resistance against the British. The Chinese sank several British ships and executed the survivors. However, these attacks led to intensified British counterattacks. resulting in the British recapturing the abandoned city of Canton. The war's final clashes took place in the winter, with combat pausing temporarily. By March of the following year, the British won the Battle of Ningpo and soon after captured the city of Sixi. British forces continued advancing until August 1842, when the Qing government finally entered peace negotiations. After weeks of diplomacy, the Treaty of Nanjing was signed on the British HMS Cornwallis on August 29, 1842, officially ending the First Opium War. Under the treaty, the foreign trade system in China was significantly altered in favor of British merchants. Qing officials were also required to pay 6 million silver dollars for the confiscated opium, along with millions more in additional reparations. All British prisoners of war were released, and the British granted amnesty to all Chinese citizens. Another term of the treaty was the cession of Hong Kong to Britain. Following this treaty, further agreements were made with Britain, and similar agreements were signed with France and the United States, granting them certain rights as well. These treaties were intended to prevent future conflicts, but since neither party was satisfied, the war was only delayed, not avoided. The conflict reignited in the following years. By the early 1850s, Britain sought to exploit the advantages of Hong Kong even further. As part of this strategy, they began registering Chinese ships under the British flag in Hong Kong, one of which was the Arrow. Once a pirate ship, Arrow had been registered by the British in Hong Kong but was still manned by a Chinese crew. When Chinese officials saw the ship near Canton in the fall of 1856, they seized it, suspecting it of piracy. This angered the British. Although the Chinese authorities decided to release the crew, this was not enough for British Consul Harry Parkes, who was particularly eager to find a pretext to declare war on China. Despite objections from the British Parliament, the Prime Minister ordered Britain to go to war again with China. As a result, Britain moved from Hong Kong and years later attacked Canton once more. As relations between Britain and China collapsed, the governor of Canton was captured by the British and sent to India. Trade between the countries also came to a complete halt. In the renewed Opium Wars, Britain was not alone this time. The French, too, had increasing hostilities with China and hoped to benefit from the conflict. In 1858, the two nations attacked China, their common enemy. In May, the Allied fleet reached Tianjin and began launching attacks on China's coastline. In June, the Treaty of Tianjin was signed between the Qing dynasty, the British Empire, Russia, France, and the United States. Under the treaty, China agreed to allow foreigners to enter the country, open more ports to foreign ships, and permit the establishment of foreign embassies in Beijing. Additionally, China was required to pay millions of silver dollars in war reparations. Though the treaty was signed, just like the first agreement, no one was fully satisfied. Just a year after peace was secured, the swords were drawn once again. A fleet of 21 ships carrying British and French envoys sailed up the river toward Beijing, intending to escort the diplomats to the capital and leave them there. However, the commander of the Taku forts at the river's entrance refused to allow the ships to pass, insisting the diplomats disembark and travel to Beijing by land. Unhappy with this response, the fleet's commander opened fire on the Chinese defensive positions and tried to advance toward the capital. Although British ships attacked the fortresses, it wasn't enough, and they retreated after facing strong resistance from the defensive forces. However, the following year, the combined French and British forces returned to the Taku forts and launched a fresh assault. The Allied forces attacked the forts along the river, both from the sea and the land, capturing them one by one and pushing toward Beijing. The Chinese army, hoping to halt the advancing invaders, engaged them in battle with a 30,000-strong force at Zhengjiuan and later at Palakiao. However, these battles were not enough to stop the British and French. The advancing army soon reached Beijing, where they looted and pillaged the imperial summer and winter palaces. 95% of the Yongle Encyclopedia, one of the largest encyclopedias of the time, was destroyed. With its capital in enemy hands, China accepted defeat and signed 3 major agreements known as the Treaty of Tianjin. Under this agreement, new territories near Hong Kong were ceded to the British. Russia, which had not actively participated in the war, was given land stretching to the Korean peninsula, where the city of Vladivostok now stands. Additionally, Western trading vessels were granted access to more ports and allowed to travel further inland via rivers. Another significant concession for China was the lifting of the ban on opium, making its sale legal. With this treaty, the Second Opium War came to an end. These agreements further increased foreign influence in China and allowed for more trade with the outside world. International diplomats of the time remarked that these treaties humiliated the Chinese Empire and marked its defeat by Western powers. The First and Second Opium Wars are seen as symbolic events in China's modern decline. These wars increased Western influence over China and left the country more vulnerable to foreign intervention. They also exposed China's internal problems and weaknesses. These wars created deep trauma and a source of anger among the Chinese people and the Qing dynasty, which had been weakened by both foreign and domestic conflicts, would fall within a few decades. Thank you for watching this episode of Encyclopedia Historia. If you enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel to see more historical content. Let us know in the comments what you'd like to see in the next episode.